Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the subscriber garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below this video, and that's where we pick from each week to answer. There's always a lot of great questions, and I try to pick the ones that are kind of timely. There's transplant and fertilizing and fall questions in this group of questions, so that again, trying to pick timely ones for the time of year it is. So again, ask questions down in the comment section for that. Put up a video on Monday about what gardening when it's way too wet, the soil's way too wet. Earlier in the season it was super dry here, and then it became just crazy wet. I mean, we've done, every single time I look over there, the rain gauge has 4 inches of water in it and I'm dumping it out. It's just been a wild run. But I put that video up on Monday, and I said I pinned a comment there that all the proceeds from that video will go to victims of the flood, Hurricane Helene damage in the western part of the state. There's a ton of fundraising stuff going on in here in Raleigh, and my Chelsea group is trying to raise money for it, and we see stuff all over the place, just collections of things that people are collecting to try to get up there. So it's kind of it's incredibly devastating. I look the western part of the state, of my state of North Carolina, and of course there's victims in Tennessee and South Carolina and Georgia and Florida, just it's a pretty widespread area. But the western part of my state of North Carolina is, if you've never spent time there in Boone or Asheville or any of the great our mountains are really kind of special. It's a beautiful place. I'm lucky enough to live in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I'm two hours from, you can put your toes in the water in the Atlantic Ocean, great beaches, and then over in the western part of the state is so beautiful. And it's just like, as soon as you get up there, you just immediately feel different. It's just an incredibly beautiful place. I play in a softball tournament in Valley Cruces down below Boone. I haven't heard any news from that place other than I know that the campground that we use for our softball tournament got pretty devastated, but other than that, I haven't heard any news from there. And then I love Lake Lure. It's just one of my absolute favorite places in the mountains. It's just devastating, what's gone on up there. So again, the video from Monday, all the funds from that are going to that. And then Steph and I are going to match whatever, amount of money that we got from that Monday video. And then again, trying to fundraise in other ways as well, to help out in whatever way we can. It's really an unbelievable event that's happened in the western part of my state. So I just want to throw that out early in the video. And then after the Monday video about things being overwatered, which is minor in comparison to what so many people are going through, I started putting up the video, single plant videos again on this channel, and I'm putting them in playlist, and then we're going to be able to make kind of combined videos later for shade plants for zone 7 and all kinds of combinations we're going to have in the future for that. So lots of content coming on just single individual plants. You can still see the front garden has this clown college look that we go for. It stayed in pretty good shape. The paths had closed in while we were out of town, and so we opened them back up, and everything's still flowering. And in the afternoon, this place is still full of pollinators here at the beginning of October. So there you go. The Learn to Garden video series will be $50 off during the month of October, and you can just use the code October to get the $50 off on that. Steph has a third design video that's going on the Learn to Garden video channel, and is shooting a fourth one actually. So hopefully during the month of October, those two videos will go up on the Learn to Garden video series. And so there'll be 4 design videos from her, and then there's like 30 plus videos that I've done teaching gardening. So that's what the Learn to Garden video series is all about, and it's over on my website. Thank you for considering it. Okay, and thanks to those who have purchased it. All right, let's see. Let's jump into some questions. This person is concerned about fertilizing better boxwoods, which this question doesn't have to be about better boxwood. It can be about any boxwood, really. They have a service that comes and does an anti-desiccant spray on their boxwoods because they're in southeast Michigan. So they spray basically a spray on them for the winter that keeps the wind from pulling moisture out of the leaves, because once the soil kind of freezes in colder areas, the plant really doesn't have access to get water up into the top of the plant. And so when wind blows across leafy evergreens, this is why you see mostly deciduous plants. As you get further and further north in the country, the plants don't have leaves in the wintertime, the native plants. They're either herbaceous and go back to the ground, or they lose their leaves completely, or they're conifers, which are well adapted at being super, super cold in the wintertime. We come in and add all these leafy evergreens, to those spaces, and then, the wind in the wintertime, just pulls the moisture out of the leaves, and there's no available water for the plant to replace it with. So that's what happens. So they're spraying an anti-desiccant spray on them, and at the same time, this company is fertilizing them, and they want to get the most growth they can out of their Skylight Better boxwoods. Should they add more fertilizer in the spring? I probably wouldn't fertilize this time of year. I just think you're not gaining much from it, and I would prefer to have them fertilized in the late winter. And then if I'm trying to push a leafy evergreen, probably come back maybe in June and do it again. That would be my recommendation if you're trying to push something. That would be the two sweet spots for fertilizing, and it still allow them to kind of wind down and go to sleep in the fall. A lot of people do some fertilizing in the fall. I've just never, I don't think there's a whole lot of benefit to it. I think a lot of that fertilizer is going to end up washed out of the space and not necessarily used by the plants. And there'll be some, the only argument is, this wouldn't be about a general fertilizer, but if you were, and this is in the week, something I added to the weekly garden planner for November on the weekly garden planner, was adding minerals, like an individual mineral. Like let's say you just basically have no phosphorus in your landscape and you wanted to add some phosphorus. This would be a good time of year to do something like that, because the freeze thaw in the wintertime would help work it down into the ground. Or like if you were liming your turf area, this would maybe arguably the best time to do it, because of that freeze thaw in the winter will hopefully help some of that stuff work down in the ground. But a general fertilizer for shrubs, I'm not going to do it this time of year. I'm just going to wait until late winter, and then at the time of year that the soil microbes are active is the time of year that they're going to break down, especially organic fertilizer, and be able to use it. Is when the soil's warmer. Okay, we spent a lot of time on question 1, didn't we? Let's see. Somebody just was pointing out that, the correlation between the native environment and the depth of the roots on things. In the forest floor, the roots tend to be shallower, and then in prairies, the roots tend to be, much deeper down in the ground. And really that's, a lot of it comes down to soil type. But yes, the great prairies of America were really created by grasses and our native plants being able to reach down and really break apart rock and gain access to nutrients that are deeper down in the soil. And our woodlands tend to, they're pretty good at it. They're cracking rock and breaking rock apart, and getting access to some of those nutrients that are in the rock. But definitely the prairies are, the king of that, with the deep grasses, where we've seen grasses root, you've seen photos of it, grass is rooted 6 feet down into that, into those prairies. Of course, that soil is probably fairly oxygenated too, because there wasn't ever a tremendous amount of foot traffic. The animals that eat those grasses tended to move, as they went, so they didn't spend a lot of time just, compacting the soil. But there's definitely a correlation. And the other thing, this is where we ended up tilling all of our farms, is because when it rains a lot of our nutrients drop, heavy nutrients especially, drop deeper in the soil. So as an example of that, calcium, the nutrient is about 7 times more heavy than magnesium, okay, in the soil. So calcium tends to drop deeper in the soil, just because of its weight. And so when we first started tilling land, when we used animals at first, and then of course tractors later, the results of our farm, our farm started growing bigger, better, fuller crops very quickly, because basically you're bringing deep nutrients up to the top and reblending them, where the water had washed them deeper. Unfortunately, we get erosion and wind blowing the topsoil off the fields, and 100, and you kill you kill the living organisms that are in the soil by flipping it over. So there's a lot of long-term negative, but the initial positive was pretty striking to those folks because, again, you were bringing up deep nutrients that happened to be heavier. Those grasses out in the plains had could really get down there and get after, and get those nutrients deeper down in the soil. So definitely advantage to them. Too many words for that, probably. Okay. To control the size of a Grand Cascade butterfly bush, which I have one in the back garden, could you limit it to 3 or 4 vertical stems? So I guess when they prune it in the wintertime, they want to prune back, just to about 4 main stems. Will that help it control the size? It's too sprawling. And they thought about tree forming it. I don't know about tree forming it. The butterfly bushes are best cut down hard in the late winter. So spending a lot of time tree forming it all season just to cut it back to the ground seems like not a lot of benefit there. The way to limit the size on that butterfly bush is to let it come into full flower, enjoy it for a while, and then cut the thing in half middle summer. And that's the way to size control it for the summer. And rather than deadheading it, just take the thing and cut it in half again. So it'll come back out. If you cut it down to 18 inches, it'll come back to about 4 feet when it initially comes back into flower, and then it just adds size all summer long until it's 6 or 7 feet or whatever. When it finishes full flowering at 4 feet, just cut the thing in half, and it'll come back to 4 feet again and flower. I think that's probably the best strategy for size controlling it during the summertime. Let's see. Being so wet, how will you know if the ground saturated has drained enough? So this was a question off of that watering video that we're donating the money from, any proceeds from, and matching it as well. They wanted to know how will you know if it's dry enough to start planting. My driveway over here is still weeping. We've got a brick driveway, and you can see water still coming between the bricks out from under the ground, weeping onto that driveway. It's like I got a spring underneath the driveway over there. So once that driveway over there is kind of completely dry, I know the soil's just not kind of weeping anymore, and I start digging holes again at that point. I did that video talking about, planting when it's too wet, potentially not having oxygen in the soil, and, the problems that would arise from that. One thing I didn't point out in that video is that once you reach a point where your soil is improved enough and drains better in the future, and you've created a better soil structure, whether it's wet or dry or whatever in your surrounding area is probably less important. This soil right here will drain pretty evenly, pretty fast. We've built so much soil structure from these wood chips and compost and the hardwood mulch, and letting our leaves decompose on it, and letting these annuals and perennials, just come right back into the garden, and doing chop and drop pruning, where when I prune this right here, the stuff just gets thrown under another plant somewhere. We've created enough soil structure out here that I can probably plant regardless of too much or too little rain at this point, and the ground is still fairly evenly moist. So over time of improving your soil, you will also get rid of some of those when is the perfect time to plant questions, right? Because you'll have a soil that, really drains well, really absorbs a lot of water. I had that as a comment, and it's not part of this today, but I did see a comment. Somebody said how much it was amazing after they had kind of followed, my program of having, added a lot of organic material to the soil over the years, how much water their garden is able to take in now without running off. And that's the true about this garden. It's an incredible amount of water that can fall here and this soil take it, before it runs off into the city sewer system. Okay, let's see. Can a Rosa Sharon be left in a container that was just purchased and planted in the spring? Yes. They're hardy in like zone 5 to 9. And so anywhere in, the only place this probably wouldn't be yes would be like in zone 5. You'd probably you wouldn't want it to just stay frozen solid, the container the whole winter. So you might want to bring it in a garage and let it, be thawed out, some. But yeah, that's not a plant that, there were all the leafy evergreens that I grew at my nursery, we would winter protect in some way, cover, or have in a house or something, a poly house or something like that. But Rosa Sharon was one of those plants. We put them pot tight and walked away. I never worried about them at all. They were fine. So put it up near the house somewhere. Somebody asked if it's Stephanie with a Y or Stephanie with an IE. It's actually Stephanie with a Y. And her mom was, I think, trying to be clever on that one, and instead of an IE. So we did occasionally see Stephanie with a Y in places, and then she prefer Steph or Stephanie when spoken to. I think she answer to all of them, but I always have called her Steph. But yeah, that part doesn't matter, but it is Stephanie with a Y, which is, you know, always gets people. Let's see. So somebody has a little lime hydrangea paniculata, and let's just say hydrangea paniculata, it doesn't matter what variety. It's sad and leggy, and other people's around them look bad too. The plants in the stores look great. Anything they can do to make them better next year. I do cut all of my paniculatas back near the ground, just like I was talking about with the butterfly bushes, because they bloom on new wood. So unless I'm trying to have a hydrangea paniculata tree, which they are called tree hydrangeas, and can, you know, even the smaller selections, if they're never pruned, will probably creep up and be small trees in the future. But I like them as shrubs. And of course, if you're buying little lime, you're probably trying to, you know, have a shrub-sized hydrangea paniculata. I cut them down in the winter because they only bloom on new wood. And then I will tell you that my moon dance hydrangea paniculata and my white wedding hydrangea paniculata that are out here in the front garden, sun's about to come up over the street over here, over top of me, probably will since I'm only on question 7, will probably run me out of the spot. These two are very full, did not have to do any repruning on them. They bloomed at this height right here, and the stems are perfectly vertical. I'm looking at this moon dance hydrangea over here. Even with all the flowers crispy on it, it's amazing how compact that is. My 2 white wedding hydrangeas in the back garden, where they're getting like maybe 2-3 hours less sun every day, are floppy and leggy. And so I really do think there's a correlation between this area gets less water, less thought, less fertilizer, less soil improvement. They're the best, my hydrangea paniculatas. That area really got a tremendous amount of work done to the soil, and it's got dappled light toward the end of the day, and it's making them stretch. So the abused white wedding hydrangea over there is my best hydrangea paniculata. It doesn't get a lot of additional water. It definitely not pushing it with fertilizer, because fertilizer is going to make it just grow a lot of green growth potentially that's going to end up flopping when it rains later in the season. So my answer is abuse them and put them in the more sun, the better. Now, paniculatas are hardy from 5 to 9. So somebody in zone 9 just heard me answer that's in Dallas, Texas. That may not be the answer for you. I think they're going to get crispy for you. So you probably are going to need them in a little bit of afternoon shade. That's the thing with making these single plant videos for something that's hardy in zone 5 to 9. If I say full sun, doesn't necessarily equate to Dallas or somewhere in zone 9, Texas, like it would in zone 9 in the Pacific Northwest. You know, so that can be a little bit different in that regard. So, but definitely as you're in zone, and I said 5 to 9 on paniculatas, probably it's more like 4 to 9. So zone 4, 5, 6, 7 into 8A probably, the more sun, the better. It will keep them more compact. And then there was another little lime question. They put it in too small of a space. Is fall a good time to plant it? Yeah, transplant it. Yeah, I would. Any of these transplant questions I'm gonna get now, once these deciduous plants, these plants that lose their leaves completely, once they're completely dormant, you can move them anytime you want to, as long as the soil's workable the rest of the winter. So that hydrangea paniculata's October 3rd or 4th as I'm filming this. Mine they're still fully leafed over there. As soon as their leaves are completely off of them, I can move them anytime during the winter without really stressing the plant at all. And optimally though, toward late winter for most people, would be the time to do it, and you could cut them back at the exact same time. Let's see. So somebody said it'd be interesting to have a hybrid video about hybrid plants and the pros and cons of each species and how they are plus or minus reflected in the hybrid. So this is, well, you know, well, a lot of plant breeding comes from, where we're mixing two different species of plants and you're trying to get something from each of the parent plants. Maybe one of the parent plants is super floriferous and the other one is super sturdy and just, you know, stands up big and tall in the garden. That's how you're looking at these paniculatas, like hydrangea paniculatas, and they're trying to find one that's super compact, but also has sturdy stems to hold it up big and strong. Moon Dance is probably the best of those, I think, right this minute on the market for doing that. Stems are super big, you know, pencils, those old thick pencils we used in elementary school, sized stems on it, holding those flowers up. But that's what so you're taking two parent plants. Sometimes you get the worst of both parents and sometimes you get the best of both parents. Sometimes you get hybrid vigor, where you mix two species together and 1 + 1 = 3 somehow. The plant just grows much faster. I think that's kind of true with like that Feather Falls Carex is an example of that. That is the craziest Carex. I've never seen Carex grow like that. And there's one called Moon Falls that's coming that's just as aggressive. I mean, the thing just becomes a beast in a single season for Carex. And the parent plants of those Carex's species, you know, it's a 1 + 1 = 3. Encore azaleas, and again, this is a good video idea, and I was just thinking I would talk about this just for a second in this video and then shoot a video about it. But Encore azaleas are a great example of that, because Buddy took our traditional Asian varieties of rhododendrons that we've always used in our landscape, and he actually mixed them with a rhododendron called Rhododendron ohamii. This is well known now, so I'm not giving out the secret sauce, because any place I go that there's plant breeding going on, I see Rhododendron ohamii planted. Like the Georgia, I was in Athens on the UGA campus at the Trial Garden there, and I saw Rhododendron ohamii planted there. So I know that everyone knows the secret sauce, right, for making repeat flowering azaleas. But so Rhododendron ohamii is not floriferous. It's an Asian species that it's got flowers, but they're not particularly nice in any way, and it's a hairy beast. It's the stems are hairy, the backs of the leaves are hairy. It's a diminutive little thing. It doesn't make any sense that you can make a great plant from this, but it has a tendency to flower during the summer. And so you took spring flowering azaleas and mixed them with a summer flowering azalea and got a fall flowering azalea out of it, that's the Encore brand. And then from there, though, you have to really select in and make sure you're getting quality varieties from that. But that's the two things together. But the other thing that happened was Rhododendron ohamii needs more sun. And so you created an azalea that actually needs more sun. And that's the thing with Encore azaleas, is a lot of people have them planted in a little too much shade. Again, if you're in Dallas, you definitely need the shade. But if you're in other places, they actually need quite a bit more sun. And it's just the combination of those two parent plants together. One is a part shade plant and the other one is a more sun plant. You put them together, you need slightly more sun than you did before. But it's an interesting thing, mixing two things together and seeing what you get out of it. Sometimes you get the best of it and sometimes you don't. It goes the other direction. Let's see. So somebody has salt water into their landscape in Georgia in 9A. And of course they have some things did fine and other things have some burn on the leaves. Should they be pruning that stuff off? I would wait to do cutbacks until late winter. A lot of times that outer damaged part of the plant can offer some protection to them through the winter. And so for me, I'm probably gonna wait until late winter, early spring, and then hope for the best. I don't think there's a whole lot you can do here. You need some rain to wash some of those salts out for sure. But plants have different ways to deal with salt. Some plants have no way to deal with salts. They just don't have any good ways at all. Other plants will take the salt and push it right out to the outer leaves on the plant and then drop those leaves off. So they have a mechanism for dealing with the salt. And you'll see that in coastal areas a lot of times. You'll see plants, even live oaks do this, where they're able to take the salts in through the plant and then constantly drop leaves. So they're just constantly dropping leaves. And what they're dropping is salt. They concentrate the salt into a leaf, drop the leaf off, concentrate the salt into a leaf. So again, a lot of plants have a mechanism for dealing with this in the short term, and they'll be fine. Others probably don't have that mechanism and may be, damaged in a way that you'll have to remove them later. So somebody was asking about having our open garden next year. We had the open garden this year and had 800 people come. They were, just for medical reasons, can't really come out in too much heat. Can we do it a little bit earlier? We're gonna have it like a week earlier, but I can't do it so much earlier that, all the annuals aren't up and, really showing off in the garden. So there's a little sweet spot there toward the end of May. Now I hope it's not 98 degrees, because I think the Friday it was 100 degrees and the Saturday it was like 98 degrees. I hope we don't have anything like that. I think that would be unusual to be in the upper 90s 2 years in a row on that. But I think it'll be sometime around June, was it the 22nd this past year? I can't remember, but I think it's a week earlier that we've talked about having it. Somebody has an olive martini elaeagnus with atomic growth above it. So a lot of times elaeagnus will shoot up these long pieces up into the air. Olive martini's the variegated one, and it's, again, anytime I talk about elaeagnus, I'm gonna get how invasive they are in the comments. Yes, they are invasive. I don't know if the variegated one creates sterile seed or not. It's not a question I actually know the answer to. But it's got this, but like all elaeagnus pungens, there are 3 species of invasive elaeagnus here, but pungens tends to have these long, strappy growth on them. They almost can vine. I've seen them this kind of growth go up through trees to try to get some light, almost like a vining type of thing that plant's capable of doing. They want it taller. Should they cut that growth off? I don't think that stretchy growth is real vertical growth, right? So I'd cut that off occasionally, and I think a little bit of pruning on it will also stimulate growth in the rest of the plant. So I don't think you're really gaining a whole lot by having 5 6-foot tall wispy pieces on the top of your elaeagnus. I don't think that's really helping the actual growth of the fuller part of the plant. So I'd cut them off. Somebody's in Alabama zone 8A. They want to direct seed Gara in November, ? Does not want to start it inside. So you can do some of these perennial seeds, from, in November, October, November, or, in the late winter, early spring. Some need cold stratification, so you may want to read about that before you are direct seeding some of these perennials. You can also do some of the winter sowing methods. There's a ton of videos on YouTube about that way you're not starting them inside, and it's sort of a middle ground, and I think you'd have a little bit more control. So starting them in some sort of plastic bucket or something that's closed, like a milk carton kind of plastic milk jug. I'll find the word eventually. A plastic milk jug or something outside. That winter sowing method might be your best bet, because that would give the seed the cold stratification that it needs, and also some more control over the seed germinating without birds taking it or animals messing with it, squirrels digging it up, whatever. So I think that's kind of a happy medium if you're not interested in starting your seed inside. Somebody just planted a Royal Star Magnolia in July in zone 8A, Georgia, from a 3-gallon, want to transplant to a new location with more room. Has 5 to 6 flower buds, best to wait until dormant to avoid bud loss, or do it now. Yeah, I'd wait till it loses its leaves. Same as that Hydrangea paniculata question. As soon as these deciduous plants, the plants that stay woody but lose their leaves, as soon as they've lost all their leaves, most of them are pretty easily transplantable. I doubt you'll lose the flower buds if you wait until it's completely dormant and it's still small, and it's only been in the ground for, 3 months at this point. So I don't think you're gonna have a lot of roots to even cut on it. The plant will hardly know it happened. So this is a tricky question. Difference between leaf compost and manure compost. with they were asking about the nitrogen. Seems like manure is for vegetables and leaf compost is for ornamentals. Why do we ever use animal manure? So a fully composted, a truly composted, and by composted I mean really gets hot, manure or leaf compost is actually going to come out very similar on the other side. So there probably are going to be some nutrient differences depending on what, where the manure, the bees are starting to show up because the sun is starting to hit these plants out here. If you want to go down a rabbit hole, look this up online and you will get the worst information of just people guessing about the difference between the two. I think both are totally fine. The main thing with compost, whether it's manure-based compost or leaf-based compost, or the combo is probably the best of both worlds where you're mixing the two together into a compost. The main thing is it actually got composted. So whatever issues that were in it from the start, whether it was weeds, the weed seed, or disease issues, or anything that the animals were eating, any pesticides, herbicides, anything like that, that went through an actual composting and got really hot. That's the main thing. And then from there, I just don't differentiate between mushroom compost or leaf mold compost or animal waste compost in any way, really. You will see in a bagged product, you will see the nitrogen, the macronutrients on the bag. So if you're buying a bag of cow manure, you might see it says 211 or something like that, or whatever. In the leaf compost, the same thing. So you may see on the manure-based compost that there's a tiny bit more nitrogen in it, something like that. But there's not a heck of a lot of difference as long as they both went through the composting process, which is the most important thing. And I think the combination of the two together is probably ideal. But again, you're going to get all kinds of crazy stuff on the internet about, that manure is not good for this and leaves aren't good for that. It's all good as long as it's actually composted. I think that's the main thing. And then again, 47 million opinions online. But people have been using these things we've known about it for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, that, heating these things up and turning them into compost and then re-adding them to soil is, builds soil life and, has some fertilizer component, added back into the soil. Let's see. How many times, okay, just a joke, kind of a question. How many times can a person buy a plant for the perfect spot only to discover they need to move it to a new spot, and then they go try to find another plant for that spot and keep moving it? Really what they're doing is just going back and shopping because they want to just keep finding new plants for their garden. Let's see, number 18, are pine needles a good mulch or should they use another one also? So I've talked about this. I like to bring it back up occasionally. Pine straw is perfectly fine for covering the ground, and lots of people have lots of pine trees, especially in the southeast. I mean, when you're driving across Texas, when you hit that part in East Texas that becomes kind of a pine forest, and you drive through it it looks basically the same from East Texas across Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama and the whole way, and parts of Florida and Georgia and North Carolina, South Carolina. It just is like you're on the interstate, you're in this pine forest, and it basically looks the same the entire way. So there are a lot of pine trees here, and a lot of people have access to pine straw. Is it a good mulch? Yes, but I've said I don't think it adds as much over long term. I don't think it builds topsoil as fast as bark mulches like hardwood bark or the whole tree mulch, the wood chips that I'm standing on in the paths here. All of our paths are wood chips. Those things are going to build soil faster, build topsoil or humus layer faster. And pine straw, just takes forever. I mean, basically, a pine needle comes off the plant, and by the time it loses its water weight, you'll see it just shrivel smaller and smaller and just basically shrivel away. So while it is good at holding soil moisture, moderating soil temperature, which is another important thing for mulch, helping reduce weeds, maybe not as good as things that cover a little fuller, but still good at weed prevention. The one thing it's going to be lacking is soil. It's soil building. You know, it just takes. I think it would just take forever to add an inch of humus from. You'd be pine strawing for years and years and years. And I've spread a lot of pine straw in this life. I've spent weekends at the farmers market. Weekends at the garden center as a kid. You know, we'd get a Friday evening pine straw delivery, and we'd sell it out. And then all day on Saturday and Sunday morning, the guy would be back again with another truckload of pine straw, and we're just loading 40 bales here and 20 bales there. It was like, so I got a lot of experience with pine straw. And again, if you have it, definitely use it. You know, there's absolutely no reason not to use it. But again, if we're trying to build soil, it's not going to be the fastest route to do it. Let's see. Somebody says they usually let their leaves fall and covers them with pine straw. Does this create a bad pocket? So yeah, it could. It depends on how thick things get over time. It's best to kind of let one thing break down a good amount before we layer another thing on top of it. So if we're doing some sort of lasagna, you know, basically of layering mulches over time, it's best to let one at least get to the point where it's not broken down completely, because we don't want weeds and we still want the soil protected and we want to be holding in moisture. So we don't want to let the mulch break completely down and be gone. But there is a delicate balance between layering it where it can get too thick in time. And of course that seasonally could change. I mean, sometimes you'd have maybe some more moisture, so this wouldn't be that big of an issue. And then sometimes, you know, it would go through a drier period of time where if you had too much organic material layered like that you would end up with dry pockets and dry sockets in between. So just let those leaves break down as much as possible through the winter into as late as you're comfortable with going into spring, and then pine straw, you know, at that point, so that you're not just check it. That's all you have to do, is occasionally just pull back and see, am I just getting so deep here that I'm starting to get weird issues where things aren't breaking down properly in these layers? So somebody said, what are the downfalls of using a mini excavator to dig 12 inches deep? They want to remove they have 1,000 square feet. They want to just remove all the soil 12 inches down and create a perennial and shrub bed. Let's see. Without prior wood chips or prep time, would simply, I guess they want to so what they want to do is take out 12 inches of soil, set the plants in place, and then backfill it with some sort of topsoil or something like that. I think you'd be much better off just amending hole to hole. Leave the soil in place, leave the mini excavator behind, get yourself a drill or hand dig them, whatever you want to do, and plant these plants in your existing soil, but amend it some with some compost. Actually, you could just cover the whole 1,000 square feet in an inch or two of compost, let's say an inch of compost, and then as you plant each plant, that compost would get mixed in. But I would not go down the road of removing your existing soil and then bringing in some sort of foreign soil around these plants on the top. You may just create a swimming pool that you can't really see. It's just full of water and becomes anaerobic. And I don't trust, again, as much as possible, I don't want things from other places coming onto this property. You know, I am getting wood chips. Everything's a risk bringing something from somewhere else, right? It comes with some risk. Either weed seeds, topsoil that all the nutrients have been used up in it. You know, somebody said they had gotten poison ivy from their wood chips. I mean, there's a risk that's going to come with everything that you're bringing onto your property. So getting to the point where you can, you know, bring in as little as possible is the best idea. That's my point. Okay, how to prune cherry laurels to get them to grow faster. Need to get them taller and wider. Don't care about the basic form. So the way I get leafy evergreens to grow faster, and the way nurserymen get them to grow faster so that they can sell them to you quicker, is they prune them pretty frequently. And so, you know, when your plant like a cherry laurel, or let's say a Nellie Stevens holly, or this Indian hawthorn right here, whatever, in the nursery setting, we might let something flush about 8 inches to a foot, something like that, and then take about half that growth off. That pruning stimulates growth, that puts it into another flush that we allow to grow 6 inches to a foot, depending on the plant. And then we cut about half of that off. And then just that's the way to go. So that keeps it in a constant growth cycle. So from March, depending on where you live, from March to the middle of July, you can use that technique. And then at some points you want to stop pruning them because you don't want growth too late into the summer. But that's the pattern to keep something in an active growth cycle, is to cut about half of the new growth off. Once you see that it's put on that flush, take half of it off. And that's a good technique. That's the nursery technique for finishing plants as quick as possible. Several prunings. It says previous tree falling event, plants popping up now. Okay, so they lost a lot of trees and then they had a couple of plants pop up. They thought were Japanese hollies because they have little small leaves on them. They're very fast growing with very small green leaves. Not as small as a soft touch holly. Is it worth keeping? My guess is that's the description of Chinese privet. And Chinese privet, if we cleared this property off right now, there's a Chinese privet on the property over here next to me that's 20 feet tall over there, and it's full of seed. It's not on our property to do anything with, but we would get Chinese privet and Japanese privet popping up everywhere. And so that's my guess is what you're actually looking at, because that would have that same small shiny green leaf that's similar to Ilex crenata. I could be wrong, but I never really see Ilex crenata coming up from seed. That's sky pencil and compacta and soft touch, and it's possible that they're seeding themselves somewhere, but for the most part, I never see them seeding. So I'm guessing you're looking at Chinese privet and you'll want to get rid of that. Okay, nope. And that's it. Okay, so that was 22 questions. We went through that reasonably fast. So thank you guys so much for following along with the channel. And again, the heart's out to everyone in the western part of our state and down to Florida. That is it's an absolutely devastating event. And thank you guys for following along with the channel. This week will be mostly, there may be a video on continuing to do some pruning out here in the garden on getting some things in order out here in the garden, but I think it'll be mostly single plant videos because we're building that library back out as quick as possible. And the $50 off the Learn to Garden video series for the month of October. Thank you guys for watching.